Did you stay over at other people's houses when you were a kid? Jessie M.
Absolutely.
Occasionally, mainly my cousins, but sometimes my friends.
Right. Because there is a whole conversation going on about sleepovers again. Now, I've been a parent for 15 years, and if I've learned anything in that time is that there's a whole lot of things you're doing every day that are going to piss off a lot of other people. And raising the word sleepovers is one of them. This new conversation that's come back around about whether kids should be allowed to spend the night at other people's houses, and if so, whose and when, has been everywhere lately, mostly thanks to a now deleted but completely viral tweet that caused a storm of agreement, which simply said, "My daughter is not allowed to attend sleepovers. I hope someday she forgives me and knows it's for the best." It's a topic that gets everyone talking because even if you're not a parent, you were a kid once, and your experiences very much affect your opinion. Now, before we get into this conversation, we have to acknowledge, of course, and say that there are many people who have very strong, very good reasons for feeling unsafe about sleepovers. People who suffered abuse in that situation or are close to those who did. Lots of people who work in child protection have very strong feelings about this, and child safety comes first, always, without question. But there's another level to this discussion, and that's where we're mostly going to be hanging out when we talk about it today. The new anxiety around sleepovers is also very much about control. It's about bedtimes, food choices, screens, technology in general. Jessie, you've been having some big discussions about this. Tell me what you're hearing out there.
So there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald about a week ago that covered this issue, and one of the people interviewed, I believe, was a counsellor. And as you say, Holly, counsellors hear some stories, and I can imagine that that would influence your worldview. But I spoke on ABC Radio about it last week and had the most interesting callers. One who was a police officer, and so was his wife, and they made a conscious decision that they would not let the things they saw in their day job influence how they parented, because they didn't want to project that anxiety onto their kids. And one of the most interesting ones was a teacher who said she'd been teaching for like more than 30 years. And at the beginning of her career, you would have school camps where maybe you went away for 2 nights in year maybe 7 and 8. And now they can barely do 1 night. A significant portion of kids will not go away for 1 night. They cannot be apart from their parents because at that age, it is the first time they will ever spend a night away from their parents. And that's causing an issue for schools. And she was saying that from a child development point of view, independence is critical at that age, because everything from packing to doing the routine of brushing the teeth or having a shower or not doing those things because you're away from your parents, they're just really important milestones that we appear to be missing. And there's a theory that Jonathan Haidt and a bunch of other experts put forward, which is this is why we're having this anxious generation, because they're not having enough practice at resilience and independence. And what do you think?
It's really hard because I feel so bad for kids who don't get to experience a sleepover and really want to. I don't remember much from my primary school days, but I do remember all the sleepovers I went on. And I started going to sleepovers really early on when I was younger with just my cousins, like family. Yeah. And I remember when I started school, my parents were a bit hesitant on taking me to sleepovers, and I think they were mainly concerned about the cultural differences. And I remember so specifically, like my Asian friends and my ethnic friends like myself were never allowed to go on sleepovers. And I think that was mainly because of the cultural ambiguity of not knowing what happens at different people's houses. And I felt so sad for those friends of mine because, and I'm sure this has changed now with kids having phones and computers, but I remember after a sleepover for weeks on end, that's all we would talk about at school was the sleepover. And there was one time in particular, I think I was around 9 years old, where I had a fever and I couldn't go to my friend's birthday party and it was a sleepover. And I sobbed for like a week straight because that's all my friends could talk about. And it would be the most mundane little things like, remember when Jessica had that pineapple lolly, even though she said she hated pineapple lollies? Like it was those little things, but it just brought such a big, different experience into our lives. And I just remember having so much fun, and I felt so sad for my friends who weren't allowed to go.
It's interesting because to what your point about what you just said, Em, I think that one of the really good things about sleepovers is observing other families up close, right? If you only ever see your family and your, cultural setting, whatever that is, because lots of families have their own cultures, you know what I mean, as well. Like if you only ever see your family up close, you assume that all of the world is like that. And I think one of the things that's really good is watching other families operate. And I'm always really conscious of that when my kids have sleepovers at our house and there are other kids there. And I sort of think, oh, wow, like they're kind of studying us like a documentary. I think it's really interesting, right? Because I understand the anxiety, obviously the serious worst case scenarios that we've discussed. But it is worth pointing out in that sleepovers also involve grandma's house, auntie's house, cousin's house. Those are also sleepovers. And the statistics will show that very often abuse occurs. So like adults who are very close and known to you. So total control would mean no sleepovers ever, including at families' houses, right? But then beyond that, you've got to start making some kind of risk assessment if you're going to be prepared to do it. And one of the things I feel a bit bad about this kind of, some of the dialogue I've seen around this new anxiety around sleepovers, and again, it's around more what time will they go to bed, and maybe they're going to eat something that's bad for them, maybe they're not going to go to bed till late, maybe they'll watch a scary movie, is I think that this sort of value judgment around it, and this idea, I've seen quite a lot of people online saying, I've decided they've only got babies and they're like, I've decided I'm not going to let my kids have sleepovers. Is if you don't have grandma down the road and an auntie next door and all that things, that means you are now granting yourselves no nights off from parenting ever, right? We're just constantly piling more and more pressure on tiny family units and then wonder why they crack. It's like, what about the village? Like the idea that if you don't have grandma who lives down the road and you're going to say no sleepovers, that means you and your partner, if you've got one, are never going to go and have a night away. You're never going to go out late. Like there's a whole lot of things you're never going to do because you're afraid, and I worry about that.
Yeah, and there's this dual tension, right? That's our kids are spending too much time on screens and not enough time with their friends, but also this very real fear about the risks that the world offers up. So if you can't leave a kid with a family member or a friend, then they're always at home, but something's got to give. So likely there are going to be moments when they're on their screen, which we know isn't perfect either. But I was watching, this is massive on TikTok, on kind of parent TikTok, right? And I was listening to some of the sentences that some are experts like pediatricians and others are parents giving some advice. And they said one was sexual assault is committed by people we know, love and trust. And another was a father, and this got so many likes and so much engagement. When it comes to my kids, I don't trust anybody. And I don't think we can live in that world. On the one hand, I totally understand it. If you have had that experience, I can't imagine what it would be like raising a child when you have had a traumatic experience as a child yourself. But if you haven't, I think you can mitigate risk. You can make sensible decisions from knowing who the family is, knowing who's going to be around. Interestingly, the discussion in the US, and this is relevant, is there guns in the house? Luckily, that isn't one that's relevant to Australia. But I do reckon that at some point you've got to trust the adults around you. And if you are sitting there with this like enormous anxiety, then your child is going to absorb that. And that can't be good either, right?
Yeah. But I also have a question on if something does go a bit wrong, like how do you manage the parenting after that? Like another example I had at a sleepover was I was at a friend's birthday. I think we were probably 11 years old, and two of the girls got into the mum's alcohol cabinet.
Yeah. This is the most common scenario in the world, right?
Okay, this is good to know because it's traumatized me for life.
It's the most common scenario.
And they were just like swigging, I want to say like Jack Daniels, like the worst alcohol. And then they started violently throwing up. And then the mum came in and she was like, oh my God, all the parents were called. We all got picked up. But then one of them wasn't allowed to go to any sleepovers for the rest of the year, and the other one just showed up at the next party. And as kids who weren't involved, we were very, very confused. And even my parents were a bit like, well, you were there, but did you do it? Like, it was really hard to navigate. They were just very confused.
So this is just like every bit of parenting. One of the things that we're all really afraid of now is everybody else's judgments, right? So that still happens all the time. That scenario that you talked about. The first time I ever got drunk was at a sleepover.
Well,
the first time I ever saw an adult magazine was probably at a sleepover. Like, it is true that these things happen.
Your sleepovers were much cooler than my sleepovers.
But they weren't, nothing disastrous occurred. You know what I mean? It was just that kind of stuff. And the thing is obviously I have a teenager and we've been through a lot of sleepover things. It's different for me. I'll talk more about my daughter's sleepovers because my son, that's a little bit different. And kids who have different needs, you know, you've got to have different rules. But my daughter's very social. She loves her friends, and sleepovers is the thing they all want to do. And I'm not in the business of telling other people what to do, but I allow them, and I allow them at my house. But I have my own rules, which I think every family does. It's like my house, my rules. So in our house, they're not allowed their phones after a certain time. So I'll go in and take everybody's phones and stuff. Sometimes kids get upset about that. It's tough. It's my house, my rules, right? Same way that if we're having pizza for dinner, we're having pizza for dinner. Obviously, dietary's not excluded.
Oh my God, I could never do like, I don't know. Aren't you just what if they hate me?
I don't care. And I'm not very particularly strict, but the thing that I always do, because when I was my daughter's age, I was a naughty teenager and I lied about where I was staying the night nearly always. So my number one thing is I always check. So I have to have the parents' phone number. And I obviously, when she was little, I had to know them and all that, but she's older now. I have to have the parents' phone number. I always check with the parent. So-and-so says they're staying at your house. Is that true? Will you be home? Like, that's base level stuff. And I know this is big on TikTok, and I feel like it's a particular thing when your kids are little and you're looking ahead and you're going, I will never. But most parents I know sit somewhere in a sensible center on this, which is they have their own boundaries. Like, so Matilda had someone stay over last week. I wasn't there. So obviously I made sure that her parents knew that I wasn't there and that Brent was there, and were they okay with that? Like, just communication, you know what I mean? And I think that most people are like that. They're sensible.
And things are going to happen at sleepovers that aren't ideal. Like on the one hand, you've got, I'm sure we all remember, you know, the 2 a.m. conversations and the realizing how shit you feel the next day when you didn't get any sleep and all of that. But on the other hand, I remember instances of bullying, of complex friendship dynamics, of mean things being said. All of those things happen too, but they are something that you deal with as a teenager. You learn things from it, and again, it reinforces your independence. But for cultural reasons, for family reasons, for religious reasons, for a million reasons, some families won't do sleepovers. And it's not the only way that you can encourage independence, right? Like,
no, and actually what happens now is something called a sleep under. So I've got friends who won't have, I've got friends who don't let their kids have sleepovers, and that's fine. And Matilda's got friends whose parents won't let their kids sleep over. So sleep under is where they come and they do all the fun things that the other kids are doing. So, you know, like if you go getting some pizza or doing whatever or hanging out, but then they come and pick them up at about 10 o'clock. Or like 9 o'clock or whatever time is the thing. And that's called a sleep under. And that is really popular, because if for whatever reason you're not comfortable with sleepovers, your kids still get some of the fun, but just not the midnight stuff.
Yeah. What I struggle with, I guess, is the TikTok parenting experts wagging their finger at other parents, sort of suggesting that you're being irresponsible or naive or idealistic if you allow your child to do anything that is slightly risky because everyone out there is a monster. I don't want to live in a world where we are treating everyone as a monster.